Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. We're about to unpack the absolutely chilling events of a true 19th century nightmare. We're looking at the anatomy of a haunting today, and I mean literally taking it apart piece by piece. This isn't just a random collection of spooky ghost stories. It's a very structured timeline of events that, well, completely dismantled a family. We are talking about the Rice family and what's now infamous as the Garden Grove incident. Right off the bat, this quote just sets the stakes, doesn't it? Whatever it was, wasn't human. This was their eventual breaking point. But to really grasp how a totally normal, optimistic family gets pushed to a point of indescribable terror, we've got to go back to the very beginning. We need to look at the environment, the local history, and, quite frankly, the massive red flags that were totally ignored in the name of chasing a dream. Section 1. The Victorian Dream House, a 19th century masterpiece in Garden Grove, Iowa. So picture this. The year is 2001. Jennifer, her husband Norman, and their 8-year-old son Andrew buy this massive historic property. Now, Garden Grove used to be this bustling railroad shipping point back in the 1800s, and this abandoned Victorian mansion was sitting right at the heart of it. For Jennifer, this wasn't just flipping a house, it was a literal calling. But it's fascinating to see the stark contrast between Jennifer's blind optimism and the sheer, absolute panic of her lead contractor, Claude. While Jennifer is dreaming of restoring this masterpiece, the folks actually swinging the hammers were experiencing a total nightmare. Get this. Claude was installing a chandelier when his ladder started shaking violently. He scrambled down absolutely terrified, swearing he was pushed by some unseen force. He literally quit on the spot, telling Jennifer, "I don't want to be in this house anymore." And honestly, by July 2001, the majority of the contractors had completely bailed on the job. Section 2. Rumors in the Basement. The Dark History of Garden Grove. You see, the early red flags weren't just the fleeing workers. It was the rumors. And in a small town, rumors spread like wildfire. They painted this picture of unspeakable horror right beneath the floorboards. So the mansion was originally built by this affluent banker. Folks remembered him from old photographs as having the palest blue eyes you could possibly imagine. Well, the story goes that this prominent guy had an affair with a young servant girl, and she ended up pregnant. To avoid a massive high society scandal, a violent argument broke out, and her neck was broken. And where do you hide a scandal of that magnitude? The local legend was that she was secretly buried right there in the mansion's basement. Which brings us to 8-year-old Andrew. Like any kid, he let his curiosity pull him down into that exact basement. And what he encountered there, well, the sensory details are enough to make anyone's blood run cold. It wasn't just dark. He described feeling this sudden, crushing physical weight, almost like bricks were literally being dropped onto his chest. It was hard to even breathe. But the craziest, most vivid detail, the basement literally smelled like wet dirt. Heavy, dense, freshly turned dirt. Section 3. The Boy Who Saw Ghosts. Visitors in the Night. Okay, so with Norman working out in Arizona about 1,300 miles away and Jennifer totally consumed by this massive renovation, the haunting zeroed in on 8-year-old Andrew. We can map out a clear escalation here of localized sightings. And Andrew bravely, but maybe a bit dangerously, kept all of this entirely to himself. First up, step 1, he sees a strange man just staring in from the window. Then, step 2, a genuinely terrifying incident where his buddy Cody points at something at the top of the stairs, bolts from the house, and literally never speaks to Andrew again, just vanishes from his life. And finally, step 3, Andrew wakes up to find a woman sitting right in his bedroom rocking chair. And he knew exactly who she was. It was the original banker's wife. He recognized her face perfectly from an antique scrapbook that the banker's great-niece had actually gifted to the family. Section 4. The Entity Awakens. A House Divided. Fast forward to January 2002. Norman finally comes back home full-time. And this is where the true psychological descent really kicks into high gear. Up until this point, Jennifer had kind of rationalized all the bumps in the night. But when Norman returned, they were both jolted awake in bed by this heavy black entity that physically dropped right onto them. The house was fully active. But why did things suddenly get so much worse out of nowhere? Well, looking at the breakdown of their emotional disconnect gives us a huge clue. You have the largest slice of the family's negative energy coming from Norman. He was incredibly stressed from his software development job and felt totally alienated in a house he never even wanted. Then you've got Jennifer carrying this massive, overwhelming burden of a failing dream project. And finally, poor Andrew, trapped in silent fear and denial. They weren't talking to each other. They were completely isolated, just sharing this same haunted roof. This emotional isolation takes a really dark turn when Norman, who was a super rigid skeptic, finally walks down into that basement. He doesn't just feel a chilly draft. No, he encounters a pitch-black mass that, in his words, literally sucked the light out of the room. And from that exact moment, Norman changes. It's like the entity latched onto him. He becomes increasingly angry, sullen, and just totally reclusive. The house was fundamentally changing him, or, maybe it was actively using his negative energy to manifest even stronger phenomena. Now, imagine the absolute terror when shortly after that basement incident, Jennifer and Andrew get back from church. The answering machine is blinking. Jennifer hits play, and this monstrous, totally non-human voice comes crackling through the speaker with a very clear, very violent command. Get out. And the most chilling part of this whole thing? Jennifer looks down and immediately realizes the answering machine wasn't even plugged into the wall. No way, right? Just impossible. Section 5, Fleeing the Nightmare, the final breaking point. By the time we hit fall of 2003, things had gone completely off the rails. They even had a desperate failed house blessing by local church parishioners who literally ran out of the basement in absolute silence. The haunting had officially escalated from creepy whispers and cold spots to sheer, undeniable physical violence. One night, while Norman is away again, Jennifer wakes up to heavy footsteps just echoing down the hall. A terrifying black entity is staring directly at her in bed, freezing her in place with sheer terror. At that exact same second, Andrew is being attacked in his room. He described this huge, heavy, black form, almost looking like Batman, physically grabbing him and completely enveloping him. Jennifer somehow manages to break free from her paralysis, grabs Andrew, and they literally run out the door into the night. They were too terrified to even put their shoes on or even glance in the rearview mirror as they sped away. Grounding all of this in a timeline, we can really appreciate the agonizing 3-year endurance test this family miraculously survived. I mean, they spent all of 2001 just ignoring the warning signs. In 2002, the entity fully awakened the second Norman returned. By fall 2003, it had become dangerously physically violent. And finally, in November 2004, they just threw in the towel, admitted defeat, cut their losses, and sold the mansion. And get this, escaping the house immediately returned the family to normal. It completely proved that the geography of their nightmare was strictly tied to that specific Victorian property. Section 6. The Psychological Toll. Anatomy of an Emotional Parasite. So what is the actual anatomy of a haunting like this? Well, looking back, the family realized that the entity operated exactly like an emotional parasite. It literally used Norman's anger, Jennifer's stress, and Andrew's silent, bottled-up fear as a battery. It was a power source. The worst of the hauntings didn't just happen at random. They escalated in direct proportion to the family's own internal turmoil. The entity essentially needed to break them apart to gain the energy it required to manifest as a physical attacking force. And that brings us to the end of our explainer today. But I want to leave you to ponder this final, chilling question about the nature of the Garden Grove incident. Did an ancient, dark history of a murdered servant girl simply break a happy family? Or did a family, already fractured by stress and isolation, provide the exact emotional fuel needed to awaken a house that was otherwise perfectly content to stay asleep? Think about the energy you're bringing into your own home tonight. Until next time, keep analyzing, keep questioning, and thanks so much for exploring this with me.